Start faster. Oh my god, we're live! And there's nobody here. Welcome to the Witchy Show, motherfuckers. Okay. So, I'm literally just talking to myself.
I'm here.
Well, you're here, but nobody else is here. This is gonna be fun. This is literally gonna be fun. This is just gonna be me and you, and we're gonna be live, and nobody's gonna be watching.
Whatever.
Okay, so I want to first get a sense from you when you think of a Book of Shadows or Grimoire, whatever the hell you call it, because apparently some people are like, it's a Book of Shadows. No, it's a Grimoire. They're the same thing. What do you think of when you think of these things? What is the first thing that pops in your brain?
I don't think they're the same thing. I think they're different. By the way, I'm Cricket Song from Lunar Wisdom, and you're watching The Witchy Show.
Thanks for doing the intro.
You're welcome.
I'm thinking about that.
I'm like, he's like not even like going, hey, guess who this is? No,
we have zero views. Be quiet.
No, we have someone, flamboyant, Firon, Lilith, Satan, Set Witch, is watching us, and he loves both of our channels. So we have someone, at least one person watching.
Okay, well, then Google Hangouts is no longer telling me how many viewers I have.
I noticed that too on my show. I noticed they don't tell us. I don't, unless you and I aren't seeing where it tells us, because we used to have a number.
Yeah, it used to be in the bottom right corner.
I know. I don't see anything. Do you see anything?
No, I now see that we have 2 people in here.
How did you see that?
I went over to the live chat.
Oh, you said you weren't going to watch it. You're
a
liar.
No,
you're a liar. Hi, Petey. Petey Adams a liar.
Okay, shut the fuck up or I'm kicking you off.
No, you shut the fuck up.
Okay, so what the fuck was I saying? Oh yes, when I went over to the YouTube live chat to see if maybe it would show me a number, and it does. There's like a peak current, but fucking Google Hangouts doesn't tell me anymore.
I know. So like when I'm doing my show on Friday nights, I have no clue how many people are watching other than like by the number that chat. But there are people that watch that don't say anything in chat. But
yeah.
Okay. So I think there is a difference. I think, and this is again just opinion based on just me, and I'm no expert, mind you.
Oh, I thought you were.
Shut the fuck up.
Your whisper into the mic sounded like ASMR.
Shut the fuck up. So I think a grimoire is more of like a spell book. It just has your spells, the recipes, the incantations. It's just like a instructional manual, where I feel like a Book of Shadows is more of a journal, which will include grimoire material, but may just have like, diary stuff, like, and it would have maybe, your thoughts about animism, or your thoughts about deities, or even maybe there are prayers and devotionals that you would do. I would include that in a Book of Shadows, but it probably for me would not be included in a grimoire. I feel like that's different. But so every grimoire is like a spell book, but not every Book of Shadows would be a grimoire. Like you could include the grimoire in the Book of Shadows, but I wouldn't include a Book of Shadows in a grimoire. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because it makes me think about how I do my Book of Shadows, and I call it a grimoire, but it has journal entries that are dated that talk about my craft and like my life and how they relate to each other. Yeah. But I would consider that more of a grimoire because I have more spells and stuff like that in it. But
I feel like that could be, those spells and stuff could be included in a Book of Shadows. Yeah. But for me, if my grimoire would only be the spells and the steps on how to do something. Okay. I see a grimoire as an instructional manual, where the Book of Shadows has instructional manual stuff, but all extra stuff too. That's how I see it.
Speaking of which, I don't have this in any of my notes, but do you put instructions in your, when you're writing out a spell for your Book of Shadows, grimoire, whatever you want to call it, do you put like step-by-step instructions, mix this amount of herbs, say these specific words, do these specific gestures, or do you just write down, like, for example, what I do is, like, if I've come up with a spell, I'll be like, okay, burn this candle with this incense, and I mean that, like, I'll say like a money incense, but that money mixture, herb, whatever incense could be whatever you want it to be. And I don't put like step-by-step stuff.
Okay, so we're going to get really specific here.
Yeah.
It depends on who's going to read that. So if I was going to make a grimoire that I was going to pass down to someone, whether it's my children or whether it's another witch, say when I'm, dead, I'm going to bequeath my grimoire to someone like you, Adam.
Yeah.
I would then write instructions like that because you wouldn't know what I did.
Yeah.
If I'm just jotting down notes that I do quite frequently just for me to look back on for me, I wouldn't because I know what I did. You know what I mean? I would say I might write like a green candle and the incense mix. I used patchouli and rosemary and basil.
Yeah.
And I used a green candle with an anointing oil made from grapeseed oil, basil oil, and I carved symbols into the candle. I'd write carved symbols, burn candle till extinguished, burn incense. I do write out the incantation.
Okay.
I write it out for me always because I sit down and I take some time writing out the incantation. And then I want to say it exactly as I wrote it out.
Yeah.
So that is always written out.
Well, that leads you down a rabbit hole because then the other question that you could ask is, well, what about, so let's say you take that spell, you've written it down, you've done it. 6 months later, you need to do it again, but you do it differently. Are you going to write a new entry for the same spell with the minor changes?
Yep, I do.
Oh, okay.
Because generally the difference, if I feel like that incense didn't work, then I would, well, and then we're going to get into, is it handwritten or in
we're getting into that later.
Right.
We're getting into that later.
But then I would make some sort of note, like maybe I'd call it prosperity spell number 1. And again, I put a date. I also put the date that I did it. I jot down the lunar phase and, the day of the week. And then, and the month, obviously day of week and the month I did it in. And if for some reason I feel like that incense mix wasn't as potent, and maybe instead of using basil, I'm going to use bay leaf instead, I would either make a note on the original one and said on a different day, I would do it with this. Maybe it might just be a sticky note or however I end up doing it. I have come to, when you look at my file, you would see that there are 3 different prosperity spells because sometimes I don't use a candle. Maybe I do a jar, a spell jar. Maybe the next time I just do an incense and a meditation. Maybe another time I do a sigil. I mean, so I may have different ways of doing the same intention too.
Yeah, that makes sense. I kind of do mine in a Charmed kind of style way. Not literally like Charmed because this is not a fucking fictional TV show. But,
yes, it is. It's the Witchy Show.
Yeah, but the Witchy Show is not fictional. Don't make me come through that screen, woman.
No, I was going to say something about Cindy, but...
Oh, Cindy Lou Who?
Yeah.
I'm Cindy Lou Who.
I know you are.
Oh my god, I've never seen this shady part of you before.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
You're just being shady. You're calling me Cindy Lou Who. Nobody knows who Cindy Lou Who is.
Well, I'm baiting them to watch our collaboration series coming up.
Where I expose exactly
who she is.
Who she is. I joke. Anyways, okay. So when I talk about doing mine like a Charmed kind of way, because we've all seen the show Charmed, they usually will have like a page that will talk about what it is that the spell is used for, and then they have a page where it kind of talks about doing the spell, but it's not like really in depth. So like if I'm doing a money spell, I might say, I used a green candle and I used a money mixture and I used a money oil, allowing whoever's going to find this book, because I'm not going to have children. I mean, I can give birth to this thing, but at the same time, it's not like she can read or write. Isn't that right, Miss Pippies? Okay, you go.
Aww.
You go, Miss Squeaks. Anyways, but yeah, so like whoever finds it will be able to be like, okay, so what's this money mixture? What's this money oil? Well, what if I made my own? Then there you go. So when we think of a book of shadows, we think of a place to store our ritual spells, incense, and other magical information, like we've talked about. There is no right or wrong things to put into a book of shadow that relates in any way to your magical path. Do you agree or disagree that there is no right or wrong way to treat or to fill up your book of shadows?
I'm sorry, it cut out when you were
Oh,
talking. There's no
sorry.
right or wrong way to
Do your book of shadows.
Yeah, unless then I would say yes, there's no one way to do it unless you belong to a coven and they have a specific way of how you should set up your book of shadows because you're part of a tradition. But
Yeah.
if you're not following like a tradition within a coven, then you need to do it however you need to do it, whether it's a book of shadows or grimoire, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. In some Wiccan covens, there's only one book held by a high priest or priestess, which we already kind of sort of established, I think.
Yeah, well, within our coven, when I ran the Lunar Wisdom coven, we had a coven book of shadows, and that everybody within the coven was able to have access to that book of shadows at any time. And they were encouraged to take information and the spells that we did and include it in their own book of shadows. However, they were also encouraged to have their own book of shadows with their own practices within it as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's how most covens do it, as far as I understand.
As far as I understand that, that's, yeah.
So Gerald Gardner, through his briquette wood covering, introduced the concept of a book of shadows. Grimoires are much older, also known as a book of spells, most notably the Key of Solomon, and they're originally European. At least what my research has told me. Can this page cooperate? At least that's what my research has told me. So what do we think the difference between a book of shadows, a grimoire, and a magical journal, and like all the other types of magical journals? And the reason I said magical journals because there's dream journals, there's like herb journals, there's any journal you can think of that is not a book of shadows or grimoire. Apparently the New Age community is like, this can be real.
I think a book of shadows is all inclusive. Personally, I think that would include your dream journal, that would include your whatever, because that's what I would say. It's a book of shadows, the things that you are delving into and you don't want to share with anyone else. You want to keep it in shadow.
Yes.
You know, it's your exploration of your own shadows and everything you do in the shadow. That's how I perceive that.
Okay.
But I know that even some individuals will take a book of shadows and separate that and call one a book of mirrors and one a book of shadows. But I would just be personally inclusive and have everything in my book of shadows when I had a book of shadows.
What is a book of mirrors?
That's more reflective stuff. That's like I would say. I'm again no expert here, but that's more of the things that you would maybe like reflect to the outside. So that might be more of things you might be willing to share with others. I don't know. I never had a book of mirrors. So
because a book of mirrors to me just sounds like it's a regular journal where you're like, dear diary, today I took a shit.
Yeah.
So there are many differences from witches on YouTube to I can't even read my own fucking writing, to like various practices. So when I see people share their book of shadows online, my first thought is no. And the reason I say that is because it's meant to be kept secret. It's meant to be personal. Obviously, if you're in a coven, right, like you'd share a book of shadows with the entire coven, like we've talked about. But what is your opinion on people sharing so publicly their book of shadows, especially on YouTube? And is there any kind of danger, if you will, around that, in the sense that, let's say you're sharing your book and you flip over into a curse and you're like, I use this on my enemies all the time, and then some witch on YouTube is like, oh, I can see your spell. Okay, I know how to counter it.
Yeah, I have a video on my YouTube channel that shows you what type of information I include in my book of shadows, but I only show you like the cover page of that section because mine was in a 3-ring binder. So one of them would say journal. And in that section would be my journal entries, things like, contemplations on deity, or my thoughts on the chakra system, that, or my dreams. That's where I included my dreams, any visions I had, any messages from spirit, any channeling sessions was included in my journal. But I only showed everybody, like, this is my journal. And this is the spells. And this is my research I did on gods and goddesses. And this is my natal chart. And, it was just sections, because I personally felt that sharing all that kind of stuff was too much. I do believe that we can share too much. I believe that we can't. There are times that we may not share enough as well, but I feel like we generally share too much. So I think there is things. I mean, to be silent is part of the witch's pyramid. So
and one of the issues that I have with people sharing so publicly their entire Book of Shadows is that everybody's Book of Shadows looks identical.
No, I don't care about that. I mean, your Book of Shadows should look how your Book of Shadows should look. If you want it to, if you want it to look like the Charmed Book of Shadows, then do it. I mean, if that makes you happy, then go for it.
Yeah, like what I mean is, like, I have no issue, like, with how you want to do your Book of Shadows or how you want to organize or decorate or any of that. It's that, like, if you watch one YouTube witch, you've basically seen them all, because all of their Book of Shadows look almost identical to each other. It's like somebody watched their videos and it's like, ooh, I gotta write that down.
They don't look like mine.
Well, nobody can look like yours because you don't share yours.
I told you, I feel like I might be sharing too much with our new series coming out.
Ooh, Cindy Lou Who.
I don't have a Cindy Lou Who in mind.
Lies.
I don't. I feel like I share too much. You and I talked about that.
Why do people have multiple Books of Shadows, and do you?
Multiple books. I would say maybe people have multiple Books of Shadows because they filled up one and they had to go into another. I don't have, well, I guess at one time I did have two. Well, and then I had the Coven, so maybe three. But one was the Coven Book of Shadows. And as being the High Priestess, I had that Book of Shadows. And then I had my personal, in my own personal practice, which included things that the Coven Book of Shadows didn't have. And then I had a digital Book of Shadows.
Oh, you one of them digital New Agers, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
So I don't have multiple Books of Shadows. I used to when I was younger, because I would start in one and then I would get bored with it and start in another one. Or I didn't like the way it was organized, or I didn't like the way that. So, but now I only have one. And it is a leather-bound book where you can't add more pages to it. But I bought an identical leather-bound book, and I just cut out the pages and taped them into the new one.
Oh, that's smart.
It is very smart. Do you organize? What are some tips for those who would want to but can't reorganize their books pages? So what basically, do you organize your Book of Shadows into specific sections? And if so, what advice would you give to people who may have a leather-bound book like myself and cannot reorganize their book? What tips would you give?
Number one, not have a leather-bound book where you can't move around the pages. That's why I used to use a 3-ring binder, and I covered it so it with pleather, and I decorated it so it looked like a bound book because I liked the look of it, but I needed the practicality of being able to rearrange the pages and remove pages and add pages. I'm a practical witch here. Witchcraft, that's where that came from. So I would say don't get a fucking leather-bound book like you got, Adam, because you can organize the things.
My thing, if you're going to go with a leather-bound book, is to, and if you really want to, sip your damn tea. We'll spill the tea in the Practical Magic series. Damn tea for now. But no, so like, because I have a leather-bound book, my suggestion would be to plot out how you want your book to be. And the way you organize it. The way I organize mine is I don't. I just start on page 1. There's a book blessing, and then every page after that is a whole new thing. And sometimes there's journal entries, sometimes there's Psalms magic, sometimes there's demonic magic. It doesn't really matter. To me,
Ooh, ooh.
organization is just too much effort. Like I'm just, and I know that's weird because I can feel Ember Honey Raven sitting there being like, "You're a Virgo and I'm a Virgo," and wait, what? And I'm like, "No, I don't organize my book. Get over it. Deal with it." um, Without too much personal information, what do you keep in your Book of Shadows?
Right now, it's mostly spell stuff right now, the spells that I'm doing.
Oh, okay. I mostly keep.
So I don't really have a Book of Shadows anymore. I just sort of have what I described as a grimoire right now.
You're not a real witch. No, I'm just kidding.
So be it.
In mine, it's everything. Every spell I've done, every ritual. If I need to make changes to a spell, I'll just take a piece of paper, fold it up, and tape it to the page so that they can open it and be like, "Oh, these are the modifications." If it's not a major modification, I'll just write in the margins that use this instead of that if you're trying to get more out of this thing or whatever. Um, where should new witches, or what should new witches take into consideration when making a Book of Shadows?
How practical it is. I mean, that's really my
Would
thing
you just like
is
to say we have a series called Practical Witches?
no, I'm serious. I'm a very practical person. Just that's who I am.
Yeah.
I mean, you look in my house and everything in my house generally has a purpose. And I think that really I was practical before we moved cross country, but since moving across country and having to downsize and get rid of a lot of our possessions, it really streamlined not only, my mundane life, but my magical practice. So if I looked at things and said, have I used this in my craft in the last 3 or 4 months? No. Well, I'm gifting it to someone. So that even included my Book of Shadows. I actually did a cleaning and right now I don't have a physical book. It's all on hard drive because I had to even downsize my book collection. So I went through everything that we owned. So my practice has become a very practical practice. So if I considered, I love the looks of journals. I do. And I go to Barnes and Nobles often and I sit there and ooh and ah over the pretty moleskin journals and the folds and the ribbons. And then I'm like, really, am I really going to use it? And is it something I need? And we don't have a lot of space. Is it something I can really add? What is this going to add to my practice? And if I can't come up with a reason, then I don't get it. And so that's, I mean, when I say, is it practical? That's how I look at things now.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. When I was planning out my Book of Shadows, I didn't really have a plan for it. I just wanted a space where I could store my thoughts, my ideas, my journal entries, and just kind of all of that stuff. But I didn't want to organize it. And my advice to people is to start small. Like just start, even if it's like a 50-page book, just start small and just write, like don't organize it, just write everything as you are progressing in your craft in it. And then later on, once you fill up that book, then take those and put them in a more permanent book that's organized. Now, for me, I don't throw anything out when it comes to my spells and stuff like that. So the other day I actually sat down and was flipping through my Book of Shadows, and I've actually found spells that I've had in there for almost 2 years now that still work to this day. And I might not use them for 6-7 months at a time, but they're there in case I do need them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's the one good thing about having it digitally stored. So I store it on my hard drive as well as on a cloud or basically in my Dropbox online. That if anything were to happen to my hard drive, I'd still have a copy of it. But like I said, with like the prosperity, for example, I probably have 3 or 4 different spells that work for prosperity. And I may even have a revision and I label it like prosperity spell with, I don't know, herbs version 1. And then I'll have a revision because if I decide to change something, it'll still have the same title, but it'll have the revised thing in the second one so that I can go back to the first one. And maybe it was done 3 years ago and maybe I made a revision and I did it, last week and the revision seemed to get more success. Then I'll be like, this is the better version. I'll still keep the old version, because it was successful. Maybe it just wasn't as potent,
Mhm.
you know? So so digitally, I tend to save more
Yeah,
than if I had physical copies of things now.
that makes sense. Um, where else was I?
I'm sorry. I do want to mention, I do when I'm crafting the spell though, I handwrite it. I know this is weird. This is probably sounds really odd, but for example, attract good fortune. I handwrite it and then I input it in a document on my computer.
We're gonna
But
get
I will
to that.
throw out that paper when I'm done.
You throw it out?
I do. I rip it up and I throw it out.
Oh, I see. You said, "Hey, witches" in the chat. I'm gonna
I
come.
did. I did say. No, I do. I throw out that piece of paper. I do.
We're gonna get to that because I got
Okay.
questions now.
Okay.
So while I did state that there is no right or wrong way, what would you consider a bad choice when it comes to a Book of Shadows or a grimoire? Like, what is one thing you'd be like, don't put that in there. That doesn't belong in there. That belongs somewhere else.
With my classification of a grimoire being just instructions and spells, I wouldn't put dreams in my grimoire. I wouldn't put journal entries in my grimoire. I would only put recipes for incense, recipes for oils, recipes for, I mean, teas and tinctures and all that. The
Yeah.
actual, I would put that in my grimoire. I wouldn't put anything else in it.
For me, what I would say not to put in a Book of Shadows is the common knowledge stuff that you can find everywhere. So like the lunar phases. We live in a technological world. Yes, that's not a word, but I just made it up. And I mean, you can Google the lunar phases. Like, there's no need to put that in your Book of Shadows. And like herbal information, like.
But see, I would see. Here's the thing with those things. I think that I would include, and because the lunar phases were important to me, I found yes, you can find information all over the internet, but I found a really good resource for the lunar phases that was more, um, had more information than just the common pages that you found everywhere. I found it in a book.
Yeah.
And I actually copied out that information into my own Book of Shadows because it was the most comprehensive chart I had ever seen. And it really delved into the different aspects of each of the phases. It had the astrological, like the actual positioning of the gibbons and everything. So
see, like that would make sense because it's really in depth. But what
yeah.
I'm talking about is when I'm looking on YouTube and I'm watching people share their Book of Shadows, the lunar phase section is always the same.
Just like the new,
Yeah.
the
And
waxing.
they don't go in depth like your book does, which would make sense to copy it into your Book of Shadows because you might not have that book in 10 years. But at the same time, it's like if you're going to put like when I say don't put lunar phases, herbal stuff like that, I'm talking common knowledge that is basic. Like that you could open a
Don't be a basic bitch. Don't be a basic bitch. Well, I would say if you're going to put common stuff like that, like if you're going to do like herbs, I would include the associations that you find pertinent to you.
Yeah.
I mean, the more common ones, basil for money. Okay. But if basil is one of your stock herbs that you use on a regular basis, like it's something like for me, for rosemary, I use rosemary in so many of my spells. I might have a chart in my Book of Shadows of the herbs that I always have on hand. And rosemary, if rosemary is one of those herbs I always have on hand, which it is, I may have those correspondences in there because it's my go-to for almost everything.
Yeah.
But if there's an herb in like Cunningham, I have this, so I'm not going to copy it in to my book.
That's what I've seen is that a lot of people will go to the Scott Cunningham book, they'll find something like, ooh, this is really fascinating, and they'll copy it into their Book of Shadows, which makes sense if like you said, you have that always on hand and you just. But I mean, at the same time, if you always have it on hand and you're always using it, you should remember the correspondences.
Yeah, you would, I imagine. But I mean, if you want to include it because this is a book that you're going to give to your, someone, and you want like A journal, a book of shadows, a journal of your practice. If rosemary is something I use all the time, I want it somewhere where then someone can pick up that book and say, oh, Cricket Song, rosemary was one of her go-to herbs. And if I never wrote any of that in there, then they wouldn't have known that. So I guess it's what do you imagine the purpose of having a book of shadows is for you? What is it for you? And why do you feel you need one?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because for me, like if I were to answer that question, it is my own interpretation of my own craft. And I mean, again, mine is very basic in the sense where I don't include a lot of these things because
Mhm.
the thought process I have is that if you're going to find this book of shadows, and it's not some archaeology dig, but I'm passing it down to my grandchild who's interested in witchcraft, chances are they're going to go and do their own research.
Are they though?
Well, if they don't, then that's their damn fault.
It is, but I think that they may take you as their foundation if you're passing it down to someone like that. So, say you don't even have a grandchild, but say you had someone that is a close friend who is also a witch, and you're working your crafts together yet separately, or even someone of the next generation that you become friends with, and they look to you as sort of a mentor or maybe just a friend who also practices, but who has more years of practice under their belt. And if something happens to you or you decide to gift your book to them, they may sort of look to you as their starting point. You know
Yeah,
what
but
I'm
I mean,
saying?
at the same time, I mean, if there's that kind of relationship between us and I'm dying and giving them the book, I would have probably taken the time beforehand to teach them.
Yeah, yeah. I
So,
don't know.
um, where are we? Okay, is this the last page? Oh my god, it
I
is. We're
don't
gonna have to
know.
find other things to talk about because we're
Oh,
only.
I'm sure we will.
Grimoires have been famous throughout the 18th and 19th century. Do you think there is a main? Well, I've already asked you this. A main difference between a grimoire and a book of shadows. Why do you think a lot of witches, specifically on YouTube, mix the concept of a grimoire and a book of shadows? Because if we look at what a grimoire is, according to the literature, they're ancient tomes of magic, and I put ancient in quotes, that were devised, and a lot of them are very ceremonial, very in depth. Whereas when we look at a Book of Shadows, we see something like Gerald Gardner's, where yes, they're kind of in depth, but at the same time, they're not like a typical grimoire, like the Key of Solomon, for example. So, why do you think people mix the terms? Are they just uneducated? Do they not care? Do we not care?
I don't know. I just think that prior to Gerald Gardner introducing the idea of a book of shadows, I think they were just called grimoire or spell books. I mean, I believe the word grimoire, isn't that French?
I believe it is, and I believe that it literally,
Means spell book
yeah, it
or
literally.
book of magic or something.
I swear to God, I had written this down. Oh yeah, a book of spells, most notably the Key of Solomon. So yeah, they're basically spell books.
They're basic, and I think if you talk to witches who are not Wiccan, they'll call their book a spell book or a grimoire.
Yeah,
And I think generally most Wiccans will call that magical book a book of shadows. I just think that when Wicca, popped up here in the United States and became popular, and everything was Wicca this, Wicca that, Wicca this, then Book of Shadows started to be thrown around as a very common term for a spell book or a book of magical spells.
hmm,
And I just think even non-Wiccans now will call their spell book a book of shadows
interesting.
because of Charmed and all these other shows. They'll call it a book of shadows when I don't necessarily. I personally believe it's a very much a Wiccan term.
Yeah, when I think of a book of shadows, I think of Scott Cunningham, Gerald Gardner, the Wiccan type of lifestyle, but I also think of Charmed. And the reason I think of that is because it is essentially a book of spells, a book of incantations, so on and so forth. But at the same time, when I think of Grimoire, the first thing that pops into my head is evil. Because in a lot of Hollywood fiction TV shows, such as Charmed, the Grimoire is the anti Book of Shadows. It's the evil Book of Shadows. And that's actually how they portray it in the show. Now, I don't literally think it's evil. It's just because when I started the craft, Charmed was a resource, if you will. And I found it fascinating. So I've always been fascinated with grimoires. The older, the better, because they're complicated, they're convoluted. There's a lot of ceremonial based steps in them. Whereas, again, when I look at a Book of Shadows, I think of something that is super easy, super simple to read. There's not a lot of incantation, not a lot of steps. I mean, Gerald Gardner does kind of get a little wordy in his, but at the same time, because he comes from a ceremonial kind of background, I think.
I think, I mean, I think it's true too. In the very first few episodes of Charmed, they refer to themselves as Wiccan
Yeah.
in one of the first few episodes. So the fact that they have a Book of Shadows made sense to me. If they were Wiccan, they were going to have a Book of Shadows.
I think if they were just witches, though, they would still have a Book of Shadows, because there's lots of movies and TV shows where they're just witches.
Well, because in Charmed, the witches are good. They're the good guys.
Charmed is for losers. I'm just kidding. Have you seen the new Charmed series, by the way?
No.
I have not. I'm waiting till the season ends, and I'm going to binge the whole season and see if it's worth continuing.
I don't even know if I'm going to waste my time.
So Judaism, Christianity, and Islam contributed to grimoires, which are a set of books containing spells, invocations, and whatnot that communicate with spirits. That is, from my research, a grimoire is something that usually contains a lot of things, be they spells, invocations, sigils, incense, whatever, that are usually used to communicate with spirits. So in my thought process, you wouldn't put that type of stuff in a Book of Shadows, but then again, I guess it would depend on your definition of what a spirit is.
Yeah, you know me, don't you?
I do.
So, Adam, what is your definition of spirit? I would also suggest that of course, a grimoire would have steps on how to communicate with spirits, because that's what a witch does. Whether a witch is communicating with beloved dead, whether they're communicating with spirits of the land or the fae, whether they're talking to spiritual entities of the divine. I mean, witches work with spirits.
This is true, but I guess where I was going with that is it's more like, have you ever looked at the Key of Solomon?
I have a copy of it on my computer.
I have an actual book of it. Oh, I'm better than you. I'm just kidding.
With my downsizing, I told you I had to get rid of so many things.
I was just poking fun. Calm down.
I know you were.
Sip your tea. Don't spill your tea. Sip your tea.
I'm gonna spill it in your lap.
Ooh, kinky. You gotta wear like 14-inch high stilettos when you do that. Okay, so when I looked at the Key of Solomon, a lot of their invocations and whatnot are used for what we or some witches, or I don't even know how to phrase this, but how some people would consider to be demons, because there's lots of sigils for different demonic entities, and there's huge Christian-based and Catholicism-based prayers and all of this other stuff that's in them.
There's sigils for the planets as well.
Exactly. There's spells.
That's not demonic.
No, but there's also spells in there to like charm a lover, or get an invisibility ring, or fly a magic carpet, like stuff like that. Like, obviously a lot of that is not real, but I'm sure that the person who wrote it at the time thought it was real, because they were tripping on opium that they had just discovered before Christ. So I guess where I'm going with that is that when I think of a witch writing down invocations and sigils to talk with spirits, I'm thinking more along the lines of what you were saying, the beloved dead, spirits of the land. And when I think of a grimoire, I'm thinking of more higher frequency vibration entities, like angels and demons and planetary entities and so on and so forth, like things that would have elaborate steps.
Yeah, but I mean, you could still do that and not have, I mean, you could connect with the energy of Archangel Michael and not have elaborate steps, if that's the relationship you have with that spiritual entity.
Yeah, and that's also the relationship I have with a lot of my entities that I work with.
So, I mean, what I really think is, I mean, Gerald Gardner, from my understanding, again, not claiming expertise, was shied away from a lot of the spirit communication, and he was more focused on the natural, the spirits of the land and the elements. Even though Wicca has a lot of high ceremonial magical ritual, and it really flavors the practice of a Wiccan,
Mm-hmm.
or Wiccans who are in a traditional coven. A lot of the rituals are very ceremonial in that sense. But from my understanding and from my reading and studying, he really didn't talk a lot about spirit communication in the way of the beloved dead and that kind of thing. His focus was more on sort of the natural energies of the land and a particular, Wiccan god and goddess. Not a lot about necromancy and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The term grimoire is very generic in the community, which we've kind of discussed. Do you think that, okay, so here's where we're going to get into your handwriting thing.
Okay.
Do you think that handwriting, for those that can, is more magical? And when I say those that can, I'm talking about people who don't have arthritis or some other impairment that would stop them from being able to sit for maybe an hour and write in their Book of Shadows. Do you think that handwriting is more magical as opposed to sitting at a keyboard and typing?
Okay, so let me start. Let me start by saying words, for me, hold power. Words, whether they're spoken or whether they're written, hold immense power just in and of themselves because of the vibration. It's a thought being manifested in a physical form, in the physical plane. So writing, I think handwriting does carry a lot of power in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think speaking holds a lot of power in it.
So the oral tradition of handing down your Book of Shadows.
Right. I think that is very powerful. I don't necessarily feel like typing out words and handwriting is different because it's different, but I still feel like they're both powerful in their own way, meaning that they're both taking an etherical thought, something that existed just in the ethers, and it's being manifested in the physical, whether it's by your own script or whether it's by you typing out the keys. I do think that actually handwriting is going to put some sort of like signature of your own self, because each of us have unique handwriting. Nobody's handwriting is exactly the same, even when you're trying to forge something.
Yeah.
You still have a personal touch to your writing and to your script. So I think that makes it more personal.
Yeah.
Which is why I handwrite it first and then I type it into the computer.
But why not keep it handwritten? I know that
because of the practicality of that. Why keep a book of paper that I already have access to digitally? Again, that's with the downsizing and making sure I don't have too much things because we don't have a lot of stuff.
So let's say that you are at your altar that's behind you and you were following a spell that was in your Dropbox and all that stuff. Would you print out the spell or would you just read it from your computer screen?
No, I print it out. Print it out and then I bring it over there with me. And then I do it and then I rip up I don't just throw it away. I rip it up. Because I don't want someone to find it. If they're going to go through my trash to find out the little rips of paper and tape it together, go for it. Then you can have that spell.
Well, we all know what I'm doing when I come to Seattle.
You're going to go through my trash? I'll share my shit with you. Who are you talking about?
But digging through your trash while you're sleeping is so much more fun and stalkerish.
All right, go ahead. Go for it.
Well,
it's in the composting trash, which means there's also like coffee grinds and food peels and all that food compost stuff in there. So go ahead and go for it.
Okay, I'll bring Cindy Lou Who with me.
No, you won't.
But Cindy Lou Who is me.
I know. I don't want her in my house.
And then the last question I have. Okay, well, I was actually going to answer that question that I asked. So when I think of writing versus typing in my craft, and this is all about me because we already heard about you.
Well, it's your witchy show, so.
In my craft, what I personally think for me, it's more magical to write it. It helps me remember it so that I'm not constantly referring to the book, and I'm not, you know what I mean? Like it cements it in my memory, and it allows it to resonate and to sit there and to sink in, and then maybe the next time I go to do the same spell or ritual or whatever, that it is there might be a change that I do, so that way I can go back and refer to it and write it down. But writing for me just seems, especially with a fountain pen, that is the only thing I'll write in my Book of Shadows with is a fountain pen, because I feel like it's more authentic, and I feel like it's more real, and I feel like if it's out in the digital space, that it's not as authentic or real.
Mhm.
So, and then it's kind of a way, it's kind of an insecurity and also a way of me validating my own craft, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah. And then the last question is do you think a Book of Shadows is more of a Wiccan concept as opposed to the concept of grimoire?
Yeah, we talked about that.
Well, I never know with you.
Yeah, I do. I think that the Book of Shadows really originated with Gardner and bringing over Wicca, and I think I could be wrong, but a lot of witches would have called their collection of magical workings a spell book or a grimoire prior to it. And I think now that Book of Shadows is such a phrase for a magical book that even non-Wiccans will adopt it to call their magical books a Book of Shadows, even though they're not Wiccan.
I've seen some witches on the internet get really pissed off at the fact that some people call what would be considered a grimoire a Book of Shadows, and what would be considered a Book of Shadows a grimoire, and they're like, no, you're mixing up the terms. And I think the reason, because of behind their angst and their faux rage, is because they are so literature based. That the literature says this is what this is,
Oh, yeah.
as opposed to, So I'm out of questions. So now we still have like 20 minutes. So what other?
Questions from the people in chat.
That's never going to happen.
Oh, come on, Lady Witch, Ashley,
Oh, we
Lauren,
have people.
Maya, Petey, Flamboyant, Farron, Lilith, Satan, Set Witch. That's a long ass name.
I know this flamboyant Farron Lilith Satan.
Lilith, Satan, Set Witch. That's a
That's like a
long
tongue
ass
twister.
name. How can you? I can't even believe you can use that on YouTube, man.
Well, they probably can, but their channel probably is like demonetized because YouTube is evil now and doesn't like anything. Yes, I'm going to comb my hair.
He's been combing his hair all night.
It's what I do. It's what I do. Like, look, I got 80s hair now. Like, I'm like an 80s woman. I got 80s hair.
Adam, do you have it all figured out in your head now, the difference between grimoire, Book of Shadows, and all that? Did we answer and delve into all the questions and curiosities you had in your head?
Well, I'm really I really want to know, like, when you started on your path, when you decided I'm going to go down this path now, when did you start creating a Book of Shadows? And what did
Right
it
away. Well, see, in my personal practice, I wasn't allowed to actually cast spells or anything because I was living with my parents. My two children and myself were living with my parents, and they're devout Roman Catholics. So they said I could take the kids and stay with them because I was going through a divorce. But the only one stipulation was that I was not allowed to do spells or to do any of that kind of thing while I lived with them. And the children and I stayed with them for 6 months. So during that time, I wasn't allowed to actually do ritual or to cast spells. So all I had was research. So I took that time and started making a Book of Shadows. So I would do all the things that newbies did. I would copy in lunar phases and correspondences, and I started planning out my first ritual I was going to do and what I was going to do in that ritual. And I started doing a Book of Shadows because my parents wouldn't say anything about that, especially if I was journaling and it was my journal.
Yeah.
It was a Book of Shadows. So that's when I started. I started that before I actually started practicing anything.
Okay. I started my Book of Shadows. So when I was 18 and I got into Wicca and all of that fun stuff, the lady that I was living with have had, and I've shown this in a previous video. It's like really old now, but it's this giant 3-ring black binder that's not a Book of Shadows or a grimoire, but she wanted to get into the Wiccan sphere of things, and so, but she never ended up going down that path. So she gave me this binder, and it has everything. It has colors, it has crystals, it has herbs, it has how to do a ritual, how to craft a spell, like everything you could think of for a new witch. And then for my 18th birthday, I got a Scott Cunningham book. And yes, my hair looks really amazing, right? And I just keep combing it up because why not? And so I got the Scott Cunningham book, Living Wicca, and I got a mortar and pestle and some herbs, and I was watching Charmed because at that time, my sister and other family members were buying me the seasons of Charmed, and I'd get them for birthdays or Christmas or whatever. So by the time I had all 8 seasons, I would just binge watch it over and over again, and I would take inspiration from how their Book of Shadows looked, not necessarily the spells, but I would start, incorporating that kind of look and feel into my Book of Shadows. And then all of my spells would rhyme. I had this notion from Charmed, and I had this notion from the internet at the time and from Scott Cunningham that your spells have to rhyme, which I now know they don't.
My
But
spells don't rhyme.
But all of my spells.
Because that's the right way.
Well.
I'm kidding. No, my spells do rhyme.
Well, I guess I'm just a fake ass witch.
You are a fake ass witch.
I know that. Don't tell anybody though, okay?
Right, Solitary Luna? No, I'm kidding.
Oh, is Solitary here?
Yes, she's in the chat.
Oh, hey, how you doing? Gotta play with that hair flip because I'm Sandy Leho. Oh, no, I fucked it up. Gotta comb it now.
But I mean, the reason why I rhyme my spells, and actually I even count the syllables of each line.
Are you serious?
I'm dead serious.
Are you like OCD?
No, I'm going to explain to you why I do this.
Oh.
Number one, I write. I'm an author. I write.
Yeah, I've read your work.
Have you? Did you buy my books? You didn't?
No,
Of course you didn't. Oh, no, I sent them to you, didn't I?
You sent me one.
All right.
I have read it.
Which one did I send you? Anyway, we could talk about that later. But
we got nothing else to talk about.
Well, we could talk about it, but I didn't want to use your channel to promote my books. So
we promoted the Practical Witchcraft.
But that's a collaboration between me and you.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. But so I write. So I'm a writer. So I have, again, there's power in words, and music and rhythm plays a big part of my own practice. So the fact that when I sit down to write an incantation for my spell, I want it to have a certain flow and a certain beat, and the rhyming helps with it. It's almost like they almost become like songs in themselves. So I weave my magic using that sound and vibration. But you're right, it doesn't have to rhyme.
Yeah.
But for me, I like the sound of it and the flow of it. I think my cat is getting into trouble over here.
Well, tell your husband to get off Elder Scrolls Online and to deal with the cat.
He's in the other room. He said, I've been playing too long. I need a break. Oh, it's my daughter. It's not the cat. That's okay.
So your daughter's just getting into all kinds of trouble now.
No, she's making something to eat and I can hear it. So I thought it was the cat, but she's just trying to be quiet.
So like I noticed that time that all of my spells were rhyming, and then I would write rituals. And because I had the Scott Cunningham book, and I like had bookmarked, essentially like dog-eared, the ritual section and the Book of Shadows section, I would constantly be redoing my Book of Shadows thinking, oh, this isn't right, or this isn't the right way to do things, or whatever the case may be. And then when I started the Witchy Show, I don't know if you remember the old videos, but I had that big ass leather book. And I liked it, but I found that it was too big because when I bought my book stand that I basically copied from Lady Gravedancer because she had a book stand and I wanted one, so I bought one. worst decision ever because I use it, but it's so full of everything. But anyways, so when I bought it, I had to get a smaller book, so I just kept looking around, and then I had the same size grimoire that I have now. but I didn't like the way it was organized. So I would basically I bought another one that was the identical, and I would just cut the pages out and tape them in or paste them in. And I don't know. My Book of Shadows hasn't changed since. Like, I add new stuff to it all the time, but
I think that's a really good idea with the buying a journal that's similar and being able to just
yeah.
insert. I think that's a great idea.
I like it. I mean, I could take off the straps that are binding the pages in, but then I'd have to, like, the book is only meant to hold a certain amount of pages. It's not meant to be expanded upon. Whereas I just expand upon it by just taping additional.
It's going to end up looking like it should look like this. It's going to end up
it
looking
already
like
does,
this, does it?
It already does because of the other content that I put into it and all that other stuff. So it already kind of looks like a clusterfuck, but that doesn't affect me because it's my book.
Yeah, it's your book. Yeah. Yeah, for an example, so here's that attract good fortune. So the beginning of my spell, the incantation, is 7 charms I gather, 7 charms I choose. Each one is right and perfect. Each one good luck imbues. That's the beginning of the spell.
But what rhymes with perfect? You didn't have anything that rhymes with perfect.
7 charms I gather. I'm sorry, 7 charms I gather, 7 charms I choose. That's one line. Each one is right and perfect. Each one good luck imbues. So I rhymed.
That is a word.
Choose and imbues. Some of the way. So this one, out of sight and out of mind, your wicked tongue I now bind.
Okay, that is so charmed.
Really?
I swear to God, they have a spell that says something like out of sight and out of mind. Something I bind, and I'm like,
well, mind and bind rhyme. Do you know it takes a lot of time to make your words rhyme?
No, it doesn't. Eminem does it all the time.
Eminem is have you seen his raps?
I listen to it all the time.
Yeah, he has rhyming in there that is so intricate and expertly done. It is insane.
There was an interview.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, there was an interview that he did where the guy asked him to rhyme something with orange, and he did it, but he did it in a way where he manipulated the words such that it would eventually sound like orange.
Yeah, exactly. That's not a normal thing to be able to do. I mean, you could train your brain. What the fuck am I doing? Train your brain so that you get the. Oh my God! I what am I doing here? I'm going to start speaking in rhyme. But you can work at it so that you can start thinking that way. But that's like not a normal sort of process to have happen.
Yeah.
What the fuck are you doing with that comb?
Well, the really long name person was like, when you comb your hair, you look like Jimmy Neutron. So I'm just.
Oh my God, he does, doesn't he?
So I'm just gonna look like this now.
Boy wonder.
So I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to talk about with Book of Shadows.
Someone asked, "Are you single?"
I'm not answering that.
But I think he is. Someone else asked that long, flamboyant, whatever, I'm not going to say it all. You know who you are. When working with deity or spirits, do we invoke and evoke to better connect with spirit or deity? When working with deity or spirits, do we invoke and evoke to better connect with deity? How many times should they do it if they decide to do that? It has nothing to do with Grimoire or Books of Shadows, but it is a question.
When working with deity or spirits, do we invoke and evoke to better connect with them? I don't know the difference between evoking and invoking. I think, isn't evoking the one where they take possession of you, and invoking is the one where you're inviting them into your space?
It depends on the perspective you're coming into the words invoking and evoking.
Well, what is your definition?
My definition is that I evoke into my space and I invoke into my body. That's the way I work with them. The other way is invoking is pulling out what is already within, and evoking is pulling in what is already out. It's like opposite.
Oh, well, I definitely don't use the dictionary definition, because when I invoke them into my space, and when I evoke them out of my space, or into me.
Oh, so then you use the other way. You don't use the way I wait. You
I
don't
don't
even
think I
use
used
either.
them
You
properly.
don't use either. No.
No.
Yeah. So when invoke, I invoke entities. It's like a possession. Invoking, drawing
So it
down
is
the moon,
also.
pulling in. Evoking, I pull into my space around me.
Okay, so I had it completely backwards then. Yeah, because what I think I meant to say prior to our live chat was that I evoke demons as opposed to invoking them because I
So
generally
you
let them.
evoke them into your space?
Yeah,
Okay, not into you.
yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, like, when I was Wiccan, which I am not, but when I was, when I called quarters, I would evoke the spiritual entities of the quarters into circle. But when I draw down the moon, when I was, calling the goddess to descend, that would be an invocation of the goddess into me.
Ah, kinky, kinky.
You know it.
So I don't think is there
I
is there.
think that was it. Solitary Luna just wanted to know if you were trying to channel Cindy Lou Who with that hair flip.
Of
And
course,
I said, of course. And
I
I
mean,
think it's making me scared.
I'm the only Cindy Lou Who on YouTube. Like, what are you talking about?
He invokes Cindy LouTube. Cindy LouTube. What the fuck is that?
It's now a new character. There's Cindy Lou Who and Cindy Lou Tube. Neither of them arrive at a point.
Oh, yeah. I was rhyming like Dr. Seuss. You know it.
Reminiscent of Cindy Lou Who, Lunar Wisdom is rhyming like Dr. Seuss. Sorry, y'all couldn't help the comparison. No. See, I'm not doing any of that. What I am is I'm being a queen. Did I miss everything? Yes. Go back.
You did cry 87.
Bye-bye. Okay, so I think that covers everything. And that leaves us with 2 minutes to spare. Any last words before the fall?
Yes, I think they all should tune in on April 28th.
I don't know, 7 days before May 4th.
I think it's April 28th on my channel, Lunar Wisdom, because Adam and I are going to be doing our practical witchcraft promo chat, where we're going to talk about the series, our 32 videos in 36 videos in 36 weeks. What the fuck was you thinking? What were you thinking, Adam? 36 videos in 36 weeks. What the fuck were you? This is insane. This is insane.
Motherfucker, zip your lips, because I'm going to explain to the internet in my southern accent, because y'all need to listen. I was approached by Lunar Wisdom, and she said, I have a list of 36 videos. And so I was like, let's do this. And then I looked at the list and I was like, motherfucker, please. And she said to me, if you don't want to do them, then don't do them. So I did all of them. And then she looked at the list once I sent her the Excel.
And started recording them.
And she looked at the list and she was like, motherfucker, please. And I said, I already been here with you with that.
Because I didn't realize how big of a project. This was actually going to be a collab channel. But no, I couldn't commit to that kind of thing, but I committed to 36 videos. What the fuck was I thinking? Yeah.
Like, you've left no room on my channel for me to do any other series.
I've left no room on my channel to do any other videos. I do the Friday night Words, Witches, Witchcraft. I do Thursday tarot video, and now this is going to be on Saturdays. 3 videos a week is all I do. I have no time for anything else.
Speaking of which, isn't there another time that I'm going to appear on your channel for another?
Oh, maybe that's April 28th.
No, that's 19th.
April 19th?
Didn't you write down something for April 19th where I come on your channel?
And then the following week you're coming on again? I'm going to have you 2 times in the same month? What am I thinking?
Well, I'm too busy looking like Cindy Lou Who.
I noticed.
But no, like we're doing another live chat where we talk about.
That's on Word, Witches, and Witchcraft, right? You're coming on my show.
Yeah.
That's the deal. Adam's going to be coming on my show, and we're going to be talking about demons. myself and my co-host Obsidian Fire will be talking with Adam, the witch's relationship with demons. So we'll be talking about that on an episode of Weird Witches and Witchcraft.
It's gonna be kinky.
And then we have the promo show, and then May 4th is the premiere of our
This
show.
stuff goes until January, like the beginning of January.
It goes from May to January.
Yeah. So I literally don't have to do anything except work on other projects for next year, which I'm not even going to get into because y'all don't get to know what they are.
Do you blog?
Do I blog? No. I'm too lazy.
You don't blog?
No. Nobody would read it. Nobody watches my stuff anyways. So like,
I would read your blog. I blog. I'd read yours. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, so that is all. I'd like to thank Luna Wisdom for being on my channel, and we'll be back next month with a new topic for Back to Basics, because that's what this little series thing that we're doing for God knows how long is about.
Yeah, what are we going to talk about next time?
I have no idea. I haven't figured it out yet. Probably crystals or something.
Oh my God, we should do you and Solitary Luna, if she's willing to, and me, we should all do a chat, the three of us.
Yeah, but you also realize that me and Solitary Luna's chats are like 2 hours long, 3 at max.
I can just pop in for an hour.
Oh,
if she'd be willing to do a threesome, we can do a threesome.
I've always wanted to have a threesome with 2 women.
All right. There's way too many holes in there, right?
Well, at that point, I think it's like 8.
I know, it's like way too many, right?
I don't know what to do with any of them. Oh, wait, isn't there something about tongues? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, my God, yes. Oh, my God, shut up.
Okay, I'm now hitting stop broadcast, and I will see you all when me and Solitary Luna decide to do a live chat. And I will talk to Solitary Luna about including you in a live chat with us.
Sure.
Until next time, everybody.